In our last session, we left off about a little over two-thirds through chapter 6 of Superbloom, How Technologies of Connection Tear Us Apart by Nicholas Carr. So we'll go ahead now and finish that chapter 6, which is titled The Democratization Fallacy. Us and them. The software routines and sharing tools that govern the circulation of information through social media are great for promoting attention-grabbing, emotion-stoking content. As quality control mechanisms, they're terrible. In a study published in 2018 in Science, 3 MIT researchers examined how news stories circulated on Twitter. They tracked more than 125,000 stories that were shared through more than 4.5 million retweets over an 11-year period from 2006 through 2017. They discovered that false or otherwise misleading stories were 70% more likely to be retweeted than factual ones. While accurate stories rarely reached more than 1,000 people, false reports often reached tens of thousands. Falsehood diffused significantly farther, faster, deeper, and more broadly than the truth in all categories of information, the researchers wrote, and the effect was most pronounced with political news. The reason fake stories get retweeted more than true ones, they suggested, is that the fakes are more surprising. Novelty attracts human attention. The spread of misinformation, the authors went on to emphasize, is not spurred by software bots, as many would like to believe, but by people. The fake spreads faster than the true because humans, not robots, are more likely to spread it. In the local cascades that flow through political groups, the messages that tend to get repeated are antagonistic ones about the views of other groups. In research published in 2021, a team of UK and US cognitive psychologists examined the spread on Twitter and Facebook of nearly 3 million posts originating from a variety of left-wing and right-wing sources. They found that people on one side of the political spectrum loved to share posts denigrating the beliefs of those on the other side. Posts about the political out-group were shared or retweeted about twice as often as posts about the in-group, the researchers reported, and each word or term in a post referring to the out-group increased the odds of a social media post being shared by 67%. Posts about the views of adversaries stirred reactions of anger and outrage, the kind of strong emotions that have been shown to rouse attention and provoke sharing. And as the posts circulated, they tended to collect mocking and sarcastic comments, further increasing their appeal as political fodder. Social media companies are well aware of how their platforms amplify this kind of clannish hostility. In a 2018 presentation to Facebook's top management, an internal research team investigating how the platform exacerbates political polarization reported that, quote, our algorithms exploit the human brain's attraction to divisiveness, according to an expose in the Wall Street Journal. Divisive content, the writers of the presentation went on to say, gets promoted in Facebook feeds because the filtering algorithms calculate it will strengthen user engagement and increase time on the platform. Facebook's public policy chief, Joel Kaplan, told the Journal that the company accepted some of the team's recommendations for curbing divisive content, but rejected others that risked disrupting the platform's operations. The alacrity with which online groups share stories about the views of adversaries adds an uncomfortable wrinkle to our understanding of the sources of political polarization. Polarization is not, as is widely believed, a simple effect of algorithmically generated echo chambers or filter bubbles. While politically engaged people do become more extreme in their views as they amass more evidence backing those views, they also welcome and rapidly share stories about opposing positions held by rival groups. Rather than pushing the partisans to question their beliefs, however, the stories just make them more certain they're right. Different points of view are seen not as opportunities to learn, but as provocations to attack. Once a group has established its position, all information, con as well as pro, tends to reinforce it. You don't need an echo chamber to be an extremist. You just need a lot of information and your own skewed perceptions. That fact was underscored by a 2018 study conducted by Chris Bale, a sociologist who heads Duke University's Polarization Lab. Bale and his lab mates recruited some 1,200 American Twitter users who identified themselves as either Democrats or Republicans. Using custom-made software bots, the researchers tweaked the subjects' feeds over the course of a month to expose them to views from the other side of the political spectrum. Democrats were regularly fed tweets from prominent conservatives. Republicans received tweets from prominent liberals. The more balanced feeds did not moderate the subjects' political views. If anything, they had the opposite effect. By the end of the experiment, Republicans had become significantly more conservative in their views, Democrats slightly more liberal. And the more attention that people paid to tweets offering opposing views, the researchers found the stronger was their ideological shift in the direction of their existing bias. The researchers conducted a second round of experiments to examine why a more balanced information diet stimulates greater partisanship. Recruiting new sets of Democrats and Republicans, they again deployed their bots to tweet Twitter feeds, but this time they also held extensive interviews with the subjects. They found that exposure to an opposing view triggers a sort of immune response within a group. Members band together even more tightly to defend their position against what they perceive as an invasive idea. People experience stepping outside their echo chamber as an attack upon their identity, Bale reports. That makes differences between us and them seem even bigger. Groups are just as prone to dissimilarity cascades as individuals are. Though the findings go against the common wisdom about the benefits of exposing people to diverse points of view, they're consistent with most other studies of voters. In forming opinions and casting votes, people are motivated much less by political ideology than by group identity. Opinions emerge from affiliation, not vice versa. People may like to believe that their political views reflect a careful, reasoned analysis of the issues, but usually they're byproducts of tribal allegiance. They're rooted in emotion, not reason. A group identity provides a quick, intuitive way to make sense of a world that resists intellectual explication. Among U.S. voters, group affiliation long centered on the Democratic and Republican parties. Many political activists and theorists viewed the rigid two-party system as an obstacle to a healthy polity. The dominance of the parties, combined with the hegemony of mass media, limited the scope of political discourse. Serving as an arm of the establishment, media companies prevented views that lay outside the narrow mainstream from ever reaching voters. Social media was welcomed as a force for overthrowing the gatekeepers and opening politics up to alternative and more radical voices and perspectives. The hope has again been frustrated by the vagaries of human psychology. The torrent of unstructured information has spurred a proliferation, most of it within the existing party structure, of extremist or single-issue identity groups, each intent on defending its territory. At the same time, the design of the platforms makes it easy for individual candidates, particularly if they happen to be celebrities with existing fan bases, to establish seemingly intimate relationships with members of the public. When print and TV were dominant, explains Princeton political scientist Jan Werner Miller, propaganda feedback loops would have been constructed at great cost by party strategists. Today, they are created for free by companies that want to maximize engagement for the sake of profit. The platform becomes the party machine. Far from promoting pluralism, the democratization of media has paradoxically created an information environment conducive to authoritarian movements and cults of personality. A strong populist leader becomes a totem of group identity, a human meme whose image and words can be shared through social media. Stanford's Fred Turner argues that the political success of Donald Trump and other demagogues around the world reveals that, quote, the faith of a generation of 20th century liberal theorists, as well as their digital descendants, was misplaced. Media decentralization does not necessarily increase democracy in the public sphere or in the state. On the contrary, the technologies of decentralized communication can be coupled very tightly to the charismatic, personality-centered modes of authoritarianism long associated with mass media and mass society. They can, in fact, be made cornerstones of such power, end quote. In diagnosing today's fractious political climate, we've been too quick to blame social media platforms for our own shortcomings. The platforms play a role, Chris Bale says, but we are greatly exaggerating what it's possible for them to do, how much they could change things no matter who's at the helm of these companies, and we're profoundly underestimating the human element, the motivation of users, end quote. The polarization and extremism we see online aren't manufactured out of nothing by algorithms. They are expressions of deep-seated tendencies in human nature that have always shaped and strained social relations and political debates. The latent causes of faction are thus sown in the nature of man, wrote James Madison in the Federalist Papers. A zeal for different opinions concerning religion, concerning government, and many other points has divided mankind into parties, inflamed them with mutual animosity, and rendered them much more disposed to vex and oppress each other than to cooperate for the common good, end quote. What's different now is that we have crowded ourselves into a virtual public square that lacks checks on our zeal and vexatiousness. Paradise Lost. The internet is broken, Evan Williams, founder of Twitter, told the New York Times in the spring of 2017. I thought once everybody could speak freely and exchange information and ideas, the world is automatically going to become a better place. I was wrong about that. His was one voice in what became, after the upheavals of 2016, a chorus of tech billionaire remorse. I think we have created tools that are ripping apart the social fabric, said Chamath Palihapitiya, the Facebook executive who had been in charge of user growth after the newsfeed launch. Facebook's founding goal, confessed the company's first president, Sean Parker, was to consume as much of your time and conscious attention as possible. He and his colleagues knew all along that they were exploiting a vulnerability in human psychology, he went on, and we did it anyway. Justin Rosenstein, the inventor of the like button, said he feared society was headed rapidly into dystopia. Even Mark Zuckerberg offered an apology, if a weaselly one. He was sorry, he said, for the ways my work was used to divide people rather than bring us together. I'm going to highlight something here for me to go back and look at later. Facebook's founding goal, confessed the company's first president, Sean Parker, was to consume as much of your time and conscious attention as possible. Very interesting. They knew they were exploiting their vulnerability in human psychology. Whether sincere or feigned, the apologies felt obligatory, a performance of contrition choreographed to fit the demands of a public looking for scapegoats. People didn't stop using social media after 2016. They were on their phones as much as ever, but their view of its effects darkened. By the end of the decade, nearly 2/3 of Americans felt that platforms like Facebook and Twitter were harming the country, according to a Pew Research poll. Only 1 in 10 considered the platforms to be beneficial. Politicians and journalists, once champions of tech entrepreneurs and their populist ethos of disruption, turned on the industry. Congress held highly publicized hearings that felt like show trials, with contrite young techies, suited and tied, submitting to ritual grillings by elderly and often clueless senators. Newspapers and magazines published long investigative reports revealing the corruption at big tech's algorithmic core, alongside scathing portraits of tech bro callousness. Silicon Valley, once portrayed as a David fighting the mass media Goliath, had become Goliath. The technology industry is a worthy target, but also an easy one. In placing the blame for the internet's failings on social media companies, we let the net itself off the hook while also absolving ourselves of complicity. Commercial interests constitute one force that determines how a new medium shapes society. But there are 2 others at least equally important: technology and human nature. Breaking up internet monopolies, banning certain platforms like TikTok, or putting warning labels on apps is not going to change the basic characteristics of computer networks and digital content, much less human psychology. By telling ourselves that corporate malfeasance has perverted the net, yanked it off its true course, we open a loophole for self-deception. We give ourselves permission to continue to believe in the democratization fallacy. What's broken can be fixed. What's off course can be put back on track. We see signs of this attitude in the growing sense of nostalgia about the internet. When Ian Bogost described the sociopathy of social media in his 2022 Atlantic article, he also expressed a yearning for a time before the giant platforms took over, when the net was a truly magical place, a green field of social connection. The early days of the web were amazing, tweeted then Twitter CEO Jack Dorsey that same year. Centralizing control of the technology into corporations really damaged the internet. Bogo's Atlantic colleague Derek Thompson, in a mournful 2023 essay, also looked backward toward a lost paradise. In the open expanse of the internet, he wrote, "We could have built any kind of world. We built this one. Why have we done this to ourselves?" Behind the wistfulness lies one of the oldest and most enduring of American myths, that of the frontier. We were given a virgin territory, a space of pure possibility, and by handing it over to greedy ranchers, we lost it. We let the open range be bound in spools of corporate barbed wire. There is no virgin territory, not in the natural world and certainly not in the technological one we have fashioned for ourselves. We adapt to technology's contours as we adapt to the lands and the climates. Mechanisms of communication, as Cooley understood, don't change our nature, but they do accentuate certain aspects of it while dampening others. A computer network exists to maximize the speed of data transfer and processing, to shorten the delay between input and output. The more we rely on computers to mediate what we say and see and think about, the more we have to adapt our thought, speech, and behavior to their characteristics and requirements. Repeated exposure to computing alters human sense-making, explains communications scholar Brian Ott. As humans try to speed up their information processing and decision-making capabilities, they are less careful and rational and more impulsive and affective, which paradoxically undermines the quality of their decision-making. When shunted into a computer network, thought and expression become virtual goods optimized for rapid exchange. The internet is not broken. It's operating as it was designed to operate. It's succeeding in making our dream of perfect communication efficient, unfettered, immersive, a reality, even as it reveals the dream to have been a delusion all along. John Dewey, the American philosopher and educator, who in the early years of the last century was the country's preeminent public intellectual, was deeply impressed by Lippmann's Public Opinion magazine when it appeared, or journal, when it appeared in 1922, and deeply troubled by it. To read the book, that was a book. Let me start over. John Dewey, the American philosopher and educator, who in the early years of the last century was the country's preeminent public intellectual, was deeply impressed by Lippmann's book Public Opinion when it appeared in 1922, and deeply troubled by it. To read the book is an experience in illumination, he wrote in a review for the New Republic. One finishes the book almost without realizing that it is perhaps the most effective indictment of democracy, as currently conceived, ever penned. But Dewey believed that for all the brilliance of Lippmann's relentless and realistic analysis, his conclusions were unnecessarily dire. The journalist underestimated the gumption and good sense of the American people. While granting that the challenges facing democracy were as daunting as Lippmann made them out to be, Dewey maintained his faith in the public's ability to meet them. When necessity drives, invention and accomplishment may amazingly respond. 4 years later, in a series of lectures delivered at Kenyon College, Dewey returned to the question of the public's role in sustaining democracy, considering it in light of the arrival of the new technologies of mass communication. The lectures were refined and collected a year later in the book The Public and Its Problems, the fullest expression of Dewey's political philosophy. In a stirring passage near the end of the volume, Dewey offers a counterpoint to Lippmann's pessimism, a vision of a great community founded on a free and open system of communication that enables an organized, articulate public to come into being. Quote, The highest and most difficult kind of inquiry and a subtle, delicate, vivid, and responsive art of communication must take possession of the physical machinery of transmission and circulation and breathe life into it. When the machine age has thus perfected its machinery, it will be a means of life and not its despotic master. Democracy will come into its own, for democracy is a name for a life of free and enriching communion. It had its seer in Walt Whitman. It will have its consummation when free social inquiry is indissolubly wedded to the art of a full and moving communication." End quote. The view of the public, of ourselves, that Lippmann offered at the start of the 20th century cut against the grain of American optimism and exceptionalism. Dewey's view followed the grain. By the time the century came to a close, Lippmann's assessment had been rejected, dismissed as the sour rumblings of an arrogant critic. Dewey's was enjoying a new ascendancy, infusing the public's sense of and confidence in the Internet's democratizing power. Although it inspires still, much as Whitman's verse does, Dewey's vision of a great community in which the machinery and the art of communication come into perfect living harmony has been shattered. We live in its ruins, overwhelmed by the information that was meant to enlighten us, imprisoned by the data that describe us. Lippmann's words, by contrast, have grown only more resonant. In Public Opinion, now a century old, published in the same year as Ulysses and The Wasteland, Ulysses by James Joyce, The Wasteland, the poem by T.S. Eliot, two other equally unsparing testaments to the fragmentation of consciousness, to a world rendered incomprehensible by information, we find a portrait of ourselves and our situation. The way we see the social and political environment, the way we create a picture of reality through the welter of messages furnished by our ever more encompassing media, is and always will be refracted, quote, by scanty attention, by the poverty of language, by distraction, by unconscious constellations of feeling, by wear and tear, violence, monotony. These limitations upon our access to that environment combine with the obscurity and complexity of the facts themselves to thwart clearness and justice of perception, to substitute misleading fictions for workable ideas, and to deprive us of adequate checks upon those who consciously strive to mislead. End quote. And that's from Lippmann's Public Opinion. Dewey told us what we want to hear. Lippmann told us what we need to hear. And I kind of feel about this book at this point like Dewey felt about Lippmann's Public Opinion, except that I fear that Carr's analysis is accurate. I'm not gonna put a rosy face on it as Dewey tried to do with Lippmann, tried to dismiss it. This book disturbs me. So thus ends chapter 6, the democratization fallacy, and thus ends as well part 2 of the book, which was titled The Tragedy of Communication. In the next session, we will move into part 3, titled Everything is Mediated, and chapter 7, which is The Dislocated Eye, of Nicholas Carr's Superbloom, How Technologies of Connection Tear Us Apart. Thank you for watching.